members of the academic staff, officers and members of the university community, and the man of the hour, Professor Errol Miller and Mrs. Miller. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome to the launch of the second volume of Errol Miller's Elections and Governance, Jamaica on the Global Frontier, the Colonial Years 1663 to 1962. 1 year ago in November 2022, the first volume of this book pertaining to the independence years 1962 to 2016 was launched at the Vice Chancellery. We are grateful that Professor Miller was persuaded to launch the second volume at the Mona campus, and that the campus principal's office agreed to partner with the Faculty of Humanities and Education to host this event, which is also being recognized as part of a number of special events being staged to mark the celebration of the UWI's 75th anniversary themed Rooted, Ready, and Rising. I am Livingston White, and I will be guiding you through today's book launch, which is being held in the Neville Hall Lecture Theatre, known to many as N1. N1 is one of the main lecture theatres in the Faculty of Humanities and Education, in which many distinguished public lectures and book launches would have been hosted. To welcome you to our faculty, we invite the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Professor Sylvia Cowenberg.
Thank you, Dr. White, for the introduction and for doing the hard work that protocol demands, and therefore I will say all protocol observed. It is an absolute pleasure to be here and to remember how this began when Professor Miller visited my office a few months ago and started talking about this book that was about to go to press. And as soon as he said it, I knew what was going to happen. I'm not sure if he mentioned it first or if I said it first. I said, okay, of course, we're going to do the launch. But I did realize that it was going to be a slightly bigger undertaking than book launches that we normally host in the faculty that are somewhat intimate affairs. And so I was very happy that when I mentioned it to the campus principal, he immediately agreed to partner on this event. So Professor Miller, a man with a wide-ranging career, which may have begun on this campus, but has taken him into many different sectors of the society. It has taken him to the Ministry of Education, it has taken him to Jamaca College, it has taken him to managing the process of elections. With such a wide-ranging career, why choose us to launch this book? Well, of course we are here because the Faculty of Humanities and Education is Professor Miller's academic home. This is where he belongs as an academic. And his work in elections and governance complements all his other work. This, as you probably know, is a man who is widely published, whether it is in education, whether it is in gender issues, whether it is now in elections. Professor Miller revealed to me that he was not entirely sure that he should be meddling in historical studies, since he does not consider himself a historian, which is why we brought a historian on board today to make sure that, you know, this was all above board, okay? So, Professor Miller. We also partnered with some other people that you brought on board, and you're going to hear a bit more about them later, so I'll leave that for now. But you're already seeing, I think, the evidence of their presence. Professor Miller, thank you for giving us this opportunity. Vice Chancellor, thank you for arranging your plans around this book launch. We are very grateful. Esteemed audience, friends all, thank you for joining us here today. I know some people are joining us online as well on UWITV, which is live streaming this. And let me add that we will also be archiving this event for later viewing on UWI Media. So, welcome all to the Faculty of Humanities and Education and enjoy this wonderful event.
Thank you, Professor Cowenberg. The Honorable Bruce Golding, former PM of Jamaica, former Prime Minister, sends his apologies as he is traveling. The Faculty of Humanities and Education joins in the celebration of the launch of the second volume of Elections and Governance, Jamaica on the Global Frontier, the Colonial Years 1663 to 1962, and we're pleased to have collaborated with the Office of the Campus Principal in hosting today's book launch. To deliver greetings on behalf of our campus principal, please welcome Deputy Dean of Research in the Faculty of Medical Sciences, Professor Marvin Reed, who will address us now in his capacity as Deputy Principal. Acting Deputy Principal.
Acting. I'm from Hollywood. I'm from Hollywood, colleagues. Good evening, everyone. I will follow the lead of the Dean and said all protocols observed. And so I'm an actor. As you readily know, the strike of the screenwriters and actors ended about 2 weeks ago, and I'm just in the job now 1 week. But nevertheless, indeed, it's a pleasure to bring greetings on behalf of the campus principal for this particular event. And I just want to diverge a little bit and speak about some other personal attributes of our author today, Professor Miller, one that was left out inadvertently by our dean. Many of you may not know that he is a very good preacher. Did you know that? Right. So my first encounter with Professor Miller was at Bethel Baptist Church. In those days, I used to be a very good student, going to Sunday school, training union, and his son was actually in my Sunday school class. So I've known Professor Miller from I was a tiny tot, all right? We won't go about in the parables of what were those seeds and which one fell on the ground, because I see the current pastor of Bethel here, Reverend Lalo. But ladies and gentlemen, Professor Miller is a very rounded individual. Not only has he dabbled in history, not only has he dabbled in managing the electoral process in Jamaica, but as I said, he is a Christian and a very good proponent of the gospel. Indeed, I'm here representing our principal, the Mona campus, which, as we all know, is the heartthrob of the university-wide system. And indeed, a lot of the things that the campus principal is trying to reinvigorate is really this whole concept of academia. We spoke about it again yesterday. He wants the return of the rigor of yesteryears that folks like Professor Miller championed, that of advocacy, of scholarship. And so he has really said, you know, Marvin and the team, let us see how we can ensure that we can build on this legacy. Many of you may know that we're in the top 1.5% of this global ranking, Times ranking. And a major component of that really has to do with the academic products that we have produced. Most of that is because of work of stalwarts that have gone before us, our own Vice Chancellor, Professor Miller here. So as one of the younger ones, despite my gray beard, it is indeed my privilege, my honor, to try and ensure that the tradition continues. So colleagues, it's indeed a welcome. The Office of the Campus Principal is very happy to partner with such scholars because, as I said, one of the issues that we want to do, especially moving for the next 75 years, because you know the other 75 years is gone. We have already set our roots. We are now rising, all right, and we will reach to the top. So thank you again and welcome, Professor Miller, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Professor Reed. Elections and Governance, Jamaica on the Global Frontier is presented in two books, The Colonial Years, 1663 to 1962, and the independence years 1962 to 2016. Together, the publication documents over 350 years of governance and election experiences in Jamaica, both as a colony of the British Empire and as a nation state from 1663 to 2016. With the work straddling the historical and political sciences, it is fitting that we invite the perspectives of scholars hailing from those respective backgrounds. Today, we will hear perspectives from two academicians, one from the Department of Government within Mona Campus's Faculty of Social Sciences, who is a lecturer in political philosophy, African politics, and Garveyism, and the other is from the Department of History and Archaeology within the Humanities and Education Faculty, where he lectures in Caribbean and Atlantic history. Dr. Louis Moyston will share his perspective first as a political scientist, and he will be followed by Dr. Dexnell Peters, who will share a historian's perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome both scholars to the podium.
Good afternoon. I too will, all protocols reserved. No, because of the time itself, I'm being efficient, but I would like to see this not as the book launch of Professor Errol Miller, but as an occasion that we salute the scholarship of this great Jamaican academician. I cherish the opportunity to speak at this occasion because Professor Errol Miller, his works, particularly those in education, they have inspired me so much in terms of my own study and also the use of his works in the classroom. And during the 1970s, for example, now Professor Miller is the kind of person who appears every time you need him. In the 1970s, there were progressive changes in education in this country, 70s rather, in the 80s, reversals, challenges in the 1990s. And then what Professor Miller did is that he came out to help with the book, High School, Jamaican Society, High School and High Schooling. Then after that, it was a crisis generated by the explosion in gender politics, when the leftists were still hanging on to class struggles and ridiculing Professor Miller's work in Men at Risk to look at the marginalization of men in the Jamaican society. And the statistics that he used, especially in education, is something that I don't think that we have paid significant attention to since. Now, since Barbados took the route of becoming a republic, there has been this discussion in Jamaica that we need to escalate the process. But for me, it is so difficult for anybody to have a one-tier constitutional change just to say that we should become a republic. What I think should happen is that I think governance, election and governance, Jamaica on the global frontier, the colonial years, 1663 to 1962, should become a document around which we develop some programs to discuss the matter of constitution in this country. There are many people who do not have a clue as to what a constitution is. There are many people who do not understand the history of constitutional changes in this country and the moments that inspire constitutional changes, and this is where his book comes in. For example, he really spent a lot of time to deal with the neglected aspect of Jamaica's history. When you look from 1663 to 1838, that first period, then we look at 1838 to 1865. And there's the other program, period, 1866 to the 1890s. And that period particularly, The 1880s and 1890s was a time when black people began to increase their presence in the political situation in this country. Now we're talking about a black majority country that black people were more or less minority up to that point. Now, let me just get back to Jamaica society and high schooling, because I think it is more than significant in the sense that we hardly have historical books on Jamaica in a very serious sense in things like education. Because if I think the only other book on the history of education I read is there's a short book by the history of education, written by a lecturer from the Michael College at that time. I think it's Millicent White. Yes, very small, but significant. But we have scholars from foreign who will come here and they will study the matter, but we do not find Jamaican scholars getting into this kind of thing, and this is why it is very important that we find a way to establish the work of Professor Miller in a significant way. And I think that there should be some section of the university or the teacher training institution where all his work are deposited so young students can learn how to research about themselves. Now, I see something deeper. I think that this work represents the synthesis of his life's work. And I say synthesis because it is just not about the history or about education. It is about philosophy. What I detect in his work is that he may have taken a pragmatist turn and a progressive look on the theory of progressive philosophy of education. When we look at his interdisciplinary approach, it is not simple. It did not take a simple mind to weave history, religion, culture, education, and politics to give a coherent and strong story, and this is what you will find in Professor Miller's work. I'm saying that the approach in terms of interdisciplinary, it is something significant that we should think about, because what he has done, he is saying that social reality cannot be discussed from a reductionist point of view, that it is so complex that we need several disciplines to make sense of it, and it is a monumental lesson that I think that we should take. I, for example, see this whole interdisciplinary thing as a way to encourage critical thinking, cross-discipline collaboration, so we can produce some new work in this country. I repeat, this work represents the synthesis of Professor Miller's life work, and I think that we should find a way to develop some kind of public education program on the Constitution out of this book, and also to develop courses. Political history. We don't have anything about political history in this University of Jamaica. Jamaican students don't have a clue about their history or their politics or anything. And I think that this is a chance that we can make that turnaround. I thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share some brief remarks on Professor Miller's new book, Elections and Governance, from the perspective of the discipline of history. I'm especially appreciative of the opportunity because this is the kind of book that I've envisioned writing later in my career. I found the book to be very accessible, and appreciated the way in which it highlighted the modern day relevance and the benefit of an understanding of history. This is one of the two aspects of the book that I wish to comment on in my brief remarks. But before I get to the modern day relevance, I want to situate the book in the wider historiography of governance in the colonial Caribbean. Professor Miller writes in his acknowledgement that he was, and I quote, deeply grateful to scholars who wrote histories, anthropological, sociological, and it goes on to list a number of them. Scholarly works which included elections and governance during different eras of Jamaica's history. And that the book connects written works of periods of Jamaica's history between 1655 and 1962, with specific focus on elections and governance of the country from the perspective of people who chose Jamaica as home, end quote. So I want to spend a bit of time reflecting on some of the historical works that have previously addressed elections and governance with the aim of highlighting the need of Professor Miller's impressive new synthesis. Perhaps the last part of the quote I just read might be the most significant, and that is a focus on the local Jamaican perspective. Some of the more prominent earlier works covering political history of the Caribbean includes works such as A.B. Keats' Constitutional History of the First British Empire, which was first published in 1930, D.K. Fieldhouse, The Colonial Empires, A Comparative Survey from the 18th Century, which was published in 1967. And today, both of these works would sort of be considered a very old-fashioned way of doing political history. More recently, Gabriel Paquette's The European Seaborne Empires, published in 2019, provides a sort of meaningful critique of these previous imperial histories and gives an accessible and substantive understanding of the legal and overall political framework that underpinned British colonies, including the British Caribbean. On a lesser scale, other historians like Jack Green and Andrew O'Shaughnessy have written on legislatures and political culture specifically in British America, including North America and the Caribbean. All these are the kinds of works which include themes related to elections and governance for individual colonies. Yet, places like Jamaica often get lost in the massive or broader and often more metropolitan-focused narratives being framed. Historians such as Edward Braffett, Gad Human, Swindon Wilmot have provided even more specific focus on the political history of Jamaica, with particular focus on the 18th and 19th centuries. Professor Miller's synthesis of all these kinds of works and more provides a new go-to source for understanding the overall political history of colonial Jamaica. Elections and Governance provides historical analysis of long-term developments spanning over 300 years that then informs some reflections on modern Jamaica. The book's 17 chapters cover perhaps 4 main phases of Jamaican colonial history. First, the early transfer of English governance systems and the rise of the white Creole oligarchy. Second, the dismantling of the slave system and the rise of a multiracial political sphere. Third, an era of increasing mass political activism, including the Morant Bay Rebellion and the early 20th century labor riots. And finally, the transition to independence, including developments such as universal adult suffrage. The impressive coverage of the book allows Professor Miller to make some interesting comparisons and observations in the books afterward. He first considers some comparisons between 1663, when the first elections were held in Jamaica, to 1962, when Jamaicans once again participated in elections to transition the country into an independent era. Professor Miller then reflects on the legacies of a number of key structures, institutions, or processes, such as the British monarchy, electoral systems, the church, patriarchy, and so on. Hopefully, we will see other works of similar focus and coverage emerging of other territories within the Caribbean. These kinds of works will allow more opportunities for deeper comparisons to other places across the Caribbean region and also enhanced analysis of broader regional trends. One of the main aims of the book is for Jamaicans to understand the unique democracy that exists in the country, to ensure that they are, and I'm quoting from Professor Miller here, are not to be trapped in an endless loop of repetition of progress and regression, but instead build a future being fully aware of their past, the imperatives of the present, and the vision, values, and virtues that inspired those of their forebears who prevailed to bring us to where we are, end quote. If to quote Marcus Garvey, A people without knowledge of their past, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Then it is accessible books like these that can help establish firmer roots in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peters and Dr. Moyson. Your perspectives have helped to set the tone for the next item on our agenda, the keynote address. Today's keynote will be delivered by a distinguished academic, international thought leader, and global public activist in the field of social justice and minority empowerment. He's a professor of economic and social history and has lectured extensively in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. He has published books on subjects ranging from Atlantic and Caribbean history, gender relations in the Caribbean, sport development, and popular culture. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, to deliver the keynote address.
Very good evening, everyone. Protocol. Is observed. But of course, I must recognize Professor Miller, my old comrade, and Lady Miller. You might not know this, but the three of us share the same birth date. The three of us were born on August 11. So that's a special bonding in and of itself. I felt a need to take advantage of my position here on this podium. But first of all, I thought I will look at you to see whether or not you would be a generous audience. And I think you are. And therefore, you will allow an elder to just share a moment of nostalgia, which is good for the souls of us senior citizens. I had to say this. I gave my first ever lecture in this room. 43 years ago, when I joined this campus, straight from graduate school, and I came here to give my first lecture. And what I'm going to say next will explain why I thought I needed your generosity. I came here and I introduced myself to the students. And I said, I'm Dr. Beckles, and it's a pleasure to take you through this program. And two of the male students in the front row came, grabbed me by the arms, and threw me out. I then went to the faculty office to explain to my dean, Neville Hall, what had happened. He came and he brought me over and he introduced me to the students. Now, the students, of course, thought that I was one of them. I was one of them, and I had not yet received my first salary in life. So I was decked out in my t-shirt and my jeans and my Jesus sandals. And I looked like them. And of course, that became the basis of a lasting friendship with two students. One of them now sits in the cabinet of Jamaica. The other, his parents were farmers in Portland, and when he told his parents what he had done, for the rest of his student years, his father would bring me at least once per term a truck full of fruits and vegetables. So, respect to Neville Hall, we are in his place. But respect also to Prof. Miller, because when I arrived here, he was not yet at the top of his game, but he was emerging as a great scholar and advocate of justice, democracy, as Dr. Moyston said so clearly, he was a man engaged in all of the major discourses in Jamaica. So in a sense, he was a mentor. And it's within that context that we became friends, because I respected him as a senior scholar in my faculty. So that's the bond, and so we go back 40 plus years. Now, this book I read, of course, in manuscript, and I had the opportunity to have another read between Kingston, Miami, Barbados, and back a few days ago to refresh the memory of some of the critical moments in this study. My colleagues have spoken quite eloquently and perceptively about the nature of the manuscript. It is indeed an extraordinary, interdisciplinary, beautifully woven work of scholarship. Now, I appreciate this very much because my own journey, I went to university to study philosophy. And I was a philosophy student for a semester until my father sat me down and said, "Now you listen to me, young man. What is a working class poor boy like you going to do with a degree in philosophy? Get serious." I said, okay, I better do something where I could make a living. So I shifted from philosophy to economics. But as a childhood radical, I still felt the need for history. And so after 8 months as a student, I finally settled down into an interdisciplinary program of economics and history. And that became my infrastructure. So I understand the urge to bring all of those disciplines together to tell the story that is not only empirically sound, but theoretically stimulating. Now, there is a triangle in this book that is benign, but I wish to bring it to the fore. It is there, clearly mapped out in the study, but I want to bring it further into the foreground by way of comparative analysis. It is Jamaica, Barbados, Britain. Barbados, Jamaica, Britain, the narrative of that relationship running through the substructure, and I want to bring it up. I know that Professor brought it up very early in the first 50 years of studying Jamaica's development, but let me say something about that. It's very important that we do this. Since Dr. Moyston has asked a question, if Jamaica led Barbados into independence and gave Barbados the courage to go forward into independence 4 years later, why is it that Barbados is now calling on Jamaica to complete the process? There's a dialectic there that we have to understand between these two islands, and of course it all connects to Britain, Great Britain. Let's look at what Miller describes as the Barbados model and the founding of modern Jamaica. And we heard that Jamaican students know very little about the history in a critical sense, not in a rote curriculum sense, critical thinking. Every Jamaican will tell you that it all started in the modern British period with the arrival of Penn and Venables. Penn and Venables arrived, kicked out the Spanish, blah, 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 took Jamaica, and off we went into modernity because the Spanish had it and they were fooling around with it. You know, a few subsistent farmers planting enough food to eat, and some indigenous people up in the mountains, and yeah, but really a beautiful, magnificent geographical space. But all of these people lack the tools to exploit this infrastructure. Okay. In comes capitalism. Penn and Venables, of course, were in Barbados, planning the invasion. The invasion was planned in Speightstown, Barbados. Penn and Venables were given the resources. By then, the slave owners of Barbados are now the richest men in the Americas. They were the ones who 20 years earlier started the sugar and slavery stuff, made a fortune, and now they're looking for a big place to expand. So they go to Britain, they try to negotiate, said, okay, permission granted to take a big island from the Spanish, any one that you can find. Okay. So Penn and Venables set out, financed by Thomas Modiford. Thomas Modiford is the governor of Barbados. Thomas Modiford arrived in Barbados in 1647 and wrote in his narrative, "I will not leave this island. I have arrived with 100 pounds of cash in my pockets. I will not leave this island until I am one of the richest men in the world." Between 1647, when he arrived, and 1655, when they arrived in Jamaica, he was indeed one of the richest men in the world. 15 years of sugar and slavery in Barbados. And he's a governor. So he arrives here. He comes in 1664, and what does he bring with him? An act for the good governance of Negroes that had been passed in Barbados in 1661. It is now being passed in the Jamaican Assembly in 1664, and the man who helped to write that is now the governor of Jamaica as well, bringing the Barbados model, sugar and chattel slavery, to be the future of the island. That's the future, sugar and slavery. Now, you shouldn't be surprised by this because Jamaica has all the potential to be the largest slave society in the world. It has the potential to be the richest plantation economy in the Caribbean. And the men who could do this have now arrived in Jamaica, fully equipped with the ideology, fully equipped with the legislation, and the entrepreneurial capacity to take Jamaica away from the pirates and transform Jamaica into the largest plantation economy in the Caribbean. That was a phenomenal project. Phenomenal project. And the men who could do that are now here. Of course, Thomas Modiford takes the Ligoni Plain for himself. From Papine to Spanish Town, Thomas Modiford took for himself. Return on his investment. The other great investor, James Drax, who had built Drax Hall, the biggest plantation mansion in the Caribbean, he built a second one in Jamaica. So he comes here and he takes from Ocho Rios all the way to Discovery Bay for himself. So these are the people who are now in charge of what become the governance of Jamaica. It's an extraordinary journey in political theory and practice. First of all, we have to get rid of these buccaneer fellows and these pirates. Capitalism cannot flourish if it is surrounded by piracy, because your capital has to be safe. You can't have pirates and buccaneers interfering with shipping navigations and so on. And who was the best man to clean up the place? Thomas Modiford. Why? because it was known that Henry Morgan, the Welsh young man, was an indentured servant in Barbados, ran away from his servitude, broke his contract, and is wanted dead or alive in Barbados and in Britain. Modiford is the governor of Jamaica, governor of Barbados, so he meets with Henry Morgan and they make a deal. I will guarantee you a pardon in London, in Bridgetown, but you must strike a deal. Help me to get rid of all of your comrades. Let us clean up this buccaneer business and get on with capitalism. Capitalism, making big bucks from agriculture and trade and slavery. And that was the launch of Jamaica, of course. It was a good deal and it was honored, and Morgan did what he had to do, blackmailed his friends and got rid of them. And in return, he was knighted. I'm not suggesting that you get knighted only for blackmailing. He was forgiven and he was knighted. He married into the British aristocracy and becomes Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. And that is the background of the triangle. So Jamaica goes off with legislation that says political power will be vested in the hands of men of lands. Property qualification, an old British concept. To rule, you must have land. If you don't have land, then you can have the equivalent in property, other forms of property. And this is where the slave laws came in. Black people, under the 1664 Jamaica Act, which, as I said, was a revision of the 1661 Act of Barbados, was explicit. Black people, enslaved Africans, are property of their owners in perpetuity, permanent property, and therefore non-human. Property and therefore non-human. So you start off on the journey, therefore, in which the Africans are being brought in their thousands, property, non-human, and therefore outside of any constitutional arrangement that there can very well be. And the people who will control the narrative of representation are those who own either the land or the human property. Jamaica very quickly established, as Professor shows, a plantocracy that 100 years later became the richest plantocracy and slavocracy in the Caribbean. Powerful men living in London, extremely wealthy, but controlling the narrative of representation in Jamaica. And this becomes a structure. Now, one of the chapters I particularly enjoyed is when the professor is trying to explain two things. The colored people challenging for piece of the action. The colored people, defined historically as the mulatto people, the mixed race people, challenging the white monopoly and pressing for inclusion. Now, and they put up a pretty impressive struggle in Jamaica to get piece of the action. Now, the Barbados comparison is very important in this regard because when the colored people tried that in Barbados, the white people told them, one more word out of you. One more word out of you, colored people, and we will bust you into slavery. And the threat of the mulatto class, even though they had land, they were free, they owned slaves, and they wished to be a part of the electoral and representative process. In Barbados, they were told, one more word from you on this subject, and we will strip you of all of your current rights and put you back in the cane fields. And so the colored class in Barbados retreated into silence. In Jamaica, they became even more aggressive and more assertive in demanding participation. But in Jamaica, they could do that because there was a greater danger lurking that threatened the entire enterprise. And this is important to the governance, and Prof. Miller makes this point in a very subtle way. When these Africans arrived in Jamaica and saw the mountains, many of them said, hell no. Hell no. This plantation slavery thing, hell no. Up the mountains to create an alternative system of government, an alternative system of existence with their own rules, their own regulations, their own leadership, creating in Jamaica a hybrid model of governance. Highly sophisticated. And of course, we know, and Prof take us through that narrative of how compromises were made, the Coffee Treaty, the deal to recognize the Maroons as autonomous, independent, and sovereign, creating a double governance model on the island. One up in the hills and one down in the valley. And of course, the ruling class in Jamaica were always terrified of that force organized in the mountains, that one day it will come down and shut down their world, as it did in Haiti. It came down the hills, joined forces, and destroyed the model that had been the official established model. That is a very important part of this narrative. You know, Prof. Miller, of course, he also got involved in the anthropology of this relationship, because you don't set up a counter model on an island that is sustainable without an identity issue taking shape. Now, when I first came to live in Jamaica, I came out of the diaspora community in the UK. And there were two things I discovered very, very early in my teenage about Jamaicans. One, they have an impulsive, uncontrollable desire for justice. Them don't like injustice. They don't like it. It's a deep-seated, deep-grained consciousness that if you mess with me, I will respond. Can't absorb disrespect and injustice. That goes back to the philosophy of the mountains. That is rooted in that migration of moving to the mountains and setting up a permanent state of revolution. A permanent state of revolution in those mountains. If you wish to build a community nonetheless, you need other values. And this is the other thing I discovered about Jamaicans. Tremendous regard for family life, deep respect for friendship, and the integrity of friendship. We used to say, boy, if a Jamaican love you, but them love you forever. But don't mess with them. And in the valley, and this is where this ideology also came, those who opted to stay in the valleys knew that in the valley on the plantations, despite the slavery, despite all of that, they were going to build families, they were going to build villages, and they were going to have as normal a life as possible. Despite the slavery monarchy, they were going to live as normal a life, family, marriage, children, church, and so on. And that, of course, is the Igbo roots of Jamaica. The vast majority of the enslaved Africans who were brought here were Igbos, brought out of eastern Nigeria, Igbo land, and all the evidence of that in Jamaica. You don't know how Igbo you are until you go to Igbo. Go to Igbo land and look around the place. The only place in Africa where they grow yam on a stick is in Igbo land. The only place in the Caribbean they do that is in Jamaica. It's not done any other island. Put the stick, grow the yam. In Igbo land, in Jamaica. Nowhere else in Africa or in the Caribbean. It's the power of the culture. And so this is the representation that has to confront this, A, the imperial rule from London, and B, the colonial rule of the landed plantocracy, who are controlling the legislature, the judiciary, and of course the political process. And the challenge is on. Now, we have a project at the moment that is trying to map, Professor Miller, the costs of that war. Jamaica in slavery was in a state of permanent warfare. We are now trying to measure the human cost of that. How many Africans were killed or died in this permanent warfare to uproot slavery and create the foundations of what would be a modern democracy? We are going through the records with a microscope, and we are seeing hundreds of thousands of people in this country paying the price to uproot the most evil system of social governance ever invented, chattel slavery. And Jamaica is the largest of the slave societies. $1.5 million Africans brought here. 1.5 million Africans. At emancipation, there were about 600,000. You know, you have to feel the power of those demographics to understand what governance was all about. The comparison again with Barbados. 600,000 Africans were brought to Barbados. 600,000 Africans were brought to Barbados in slavery. At the end of slavery, there were 83,000 remaining. How do you reduce 600,000 people to 83? You're talking of a form of governance that is designed and structured to be genocidal. It's a genocidal system of governance that the majority of the people do not matter in terms of governance and civil society. Your purpose here is to supply labor. And when you cannot supply the labor, you die and you are replaced. And that's the governance model that lies at the basis of this book. And then it goes into emancipation. At emancipation, the fundamental principles remain. And this is why Morant Bay is so critical. If you say that that act of emancipation is the harbinger of liberation, and then it cannot be applied, then you're talking about the greatest form of deception imaginable, not acceptable. And it was not acceptable because what this book shows is this attempt by a ruling class to normalize monopoly control of power. And the masses of people having a problem with that existential reality. And then you pass an act of emancipation. And the act itself is the most racist legislation ever passed in the British Parliament. And the question is, how can I say this? How can I say that the act of emancipation is the most racist legislation ever passed in the British Parliament? It is simple because for 300 years, the British Parliament had been denying the fact that they had converted black people into property. They had converted them into chattel and real estate. That was their constitutional identity. They were denying it. They said it wasn't the British Parliament. It's the colonial leaders who have done this. It's not the British Parliament. It's the colonial legislature that has done this. Of course, that was nonsense. But in the Emancipation Act, they had to pay the slave owners compensation. They had to pay them property compensation. Because you are taking away people's property and you had to compensate them full market value. Having appropriated their property, you had to compensate them. And therefore the Emancipation Act begins with, we finally recognize that our 700,000 Africans in the Caribbean, they are our property. And we're taking that property away from those who own it, and therefore we had to compensate them property value, $20 million in cash. Finally admitted that they had converted us into non-humans, property and chattel. So the struggle continues. The struggle had to continue, and this is why Bogle in 1865 and his comrades, and the reactions were not surprising. You challenge us and we put a rope around your neck. I mean, it is as simple as that. You want to break our monopoly power, so we're going to send a message to you mulatto people. Gordon, we're going to put a rope around your neck. And Bogle, so we're sending two messages. One to the incipient challenging colored people, and the other to the black people who believe that they have a stake and a right to a stake in the nation that's emerging. The most brutal ruling class imaginable was the ruling class that controlled Jamaica. And we know this because we compare and contrast. We look at all the islands, we compare and we contrast. And this option for the ultimate solution, this almost genocidal, pathological desire to take black life at all costs, rooted in these governance models. Thus, the 20th century is where Professor ends his narrative, the revolution of 1938, and the consequences of that. I arrived in Jamaica a decade after the Walter Rodney riots. After young black people in Jamaica, 6 years after independence, were saying we want to be exposed to African history. We want to be exposed to the ancestral knowledge of our foreparents. We want to know about us. What happens? The government sends the soldiers onto the campus. Walter Rodney is told, you and your type are not wanted here. I once interviewed Hugh Shearer long after he had given up his political engagements, and I said to him, I said, how were you able, as a black prime minister, to unleash military power upon young people whose primary quest is knowledge, relevant knowledge about our identity. I said, well, he said, Professor, you have to remember, you know, that in my time as Prime Minister, there wasn't much black in the Parliament beyond the color in the flag. And we have moved from 1655 to 1968. And that narrative was still being litigated in the electoral system, in the legal system, in the economic system, in the social system, and every institutional structure that constituted the nation. The issue of democracy is still being contested. Democracy is about fundamental equality. Equality, respect for rights of everyone, equal citizenship, and institutions that enforce and reinforce those values. We have to thank Professor for giving us 300 years of sound, empirical evidence and theoretical insights. I read it twice and I need to read it again because I don't want to miss anything. Because to know Jamaica is to know what is constituted in this book. I would venture to say that you cannot possibly understand this country until you have read and comprehended this book. Not possible, because you need to know the tracks on which the train is moving, the train that is called the nation. What are the tracks on which the nation is moving? Why does it deviate to the left or to the right? Why does it stop and start again? All of these things, you will have a very insightful comprehension if you're able to endure. And I say endure because 400 pages is enough pages. enough pages. But 400 pages that pull you in. You are pulled in and you want to read more and you want to, and you're constantly saying to yourself, now I understand this, now I know why, now I know this. Dr. Moxon, you talk about the progress of the 70s and then the reaction of the 80s. Well, you know of what I speak. This is a book that will help us all to understand the tracks on which this nation is moving and the directions it is taken. Professor Miller, we cannot thank you. We cannot thank you enough. Our young scholar said he wishes to write a book like this when he has a beard like Dr. Moxon. This book, I agree with you, cannot be written by a short pants man. This is a long pants man. This is a long pants man's book, Professor. And we know he will have his long pants in good time. Thank you very much, and blessings. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Hilary, for your usual insightful commentary, which has helped us to appreciate even more the importance of the publication, Election and Governance, Jamaica on the Global Frontier, the Colonial Years, 1663 to 1962. I pause to acknowledge the presence of the Chairman of Campus Council, Dr. the Honorable Earl Jarrett, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the UWI Campus, Professor Denzel Williams, and Deputy Campus Registrar, Jonathan Archie. Earlier, I announced that you would have come here later, and you are now here, turning me into the most trustworthy moderator. See, I tell you they'll come, they'll come. Now, naturally, having heard our Vice Chancellor's reflection, I know we're now eager to hear the response from the author of the book being launched today. He is a leading Jamaican educator with a distinguished career spanning private and public service over 5 decades and has received numerous awards internationally for his work. He has been a high school science teacher, university lecturer in science education, college principal, university professor, chancellor of a university college, permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education, independent senator in the Parliament of Jamaica, a president of the Teachers Association, a chairman of the board of the State Broadcasting Corporation, chairman of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, a researcher, an international consultant, chairman and member of several school and college boards. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor the Honorable Errol Miller.
Mr. Moderator, Vice Chancellor, Principal, Deputy Principal, Chairman of the Campus Council, distinguished ladies and gentlemen all. Those of you who were here about 2.5 weeks ago, remember I couldn't come onto this stage. I spoke down there. This was at the Errol Miller Biennial Lecture, because the day before I had slipped at home and injured my knee. Today I can mount the stage. And Professor Reed, I must tell you, I finally did an MRI, and it said I had strained both knees. So I've been brought to my knees, but today I can mount. I want to acknowledge Dr. the Honorable Earl Jarrett and members of the Electoral Commission and my former, I have to be careful, twin when I was there, Dr. the Honorable Dorothy Pine McClarty. I see my pastor, members of the Bethel Baptist Church. And Professor Reed, it's good to know that you can even remember training union. Yes. I see my president of the JTA and other members of the JTA. I see my colleagues in the School of Education, Dr. Rainford and all of those. I'm doing categories because I can't just say all protocol. I'm sorry. I see my family. Right here is my wife, Dr. Sharon Miller. I have to tell you a little secret apart from that. She has a maroon father and an Igbo mother. Figure that out. I see many friends. I have to tell you, and then, of course, Ian Randall Publishers and the family of Ian Randall Publishers. I have now seen that what Mrs. Pine McClarty called her adult members are adults. Great to see you. Since returning to Jamaica, because of COVID-induced isolation in the United States for 3 years, I started to come to events where some of my former students have become professors and moved up the academic ladder and launched books and all of those things. And Professor Cohenberg have treated me in a very gracious manner in which, I couldn't ask better. And she kept saying to me, Errol, we have to bring you back to the faculty for something. And one of the things that I am truly grateful for is this magnificent department of history that resides here on the Mona campus. If people don't know the history, it's not because of the department. I'm not going to call any names because I will surely get myself into trouble. Already one has confessed. He started here and others. But they have done some magnificent work. What I have done really is to connect what they have done. I've trespassed in history. I'm no historian. They have written it. I've simply read it and connected it. Because you see, the discipline says you must go in eras and you study a particular era extensively. I have just connected up the eras. And then, of course, there have been others within the university in the social sciences, as Dr. Moyston has pointed out, in governance, in politics, in sociology, that have done similar works. Now, I'm a really mixed up person because my first degree is in botany and zoology. And I was confused when I came over and my first job in university was in science education. I was confused with how they did certain things, and I had to go back to clear up my mind on it when I did a postdoctoral fellowship. But the interesting thing was that the closest I could come to was animal behavior. And so I went to social psychology and tried to study how institutions shape the minds and the mentalities and the mindsets of our people. It's still one of the things that I'm probing. So I've come to rely on my colleagues in the other disciplines, and I suppose I have the audacity to trespass on their territory. But really, as far as I'm concerned, these two books are a provocation for the real historians and the real social scientists to correct all the grievous errors I've made. And I'm very happy that Miles Fletcher and Gordon, and I'm recognizing Mr. Kelman, that you have actually established a scholarship for real historians to continue the work in which you pick up particularly on the history on governance, not only in the colonial era, but right at this moment, because some of the things we have done have not yet been taught, because Jamaica is not at a standstill. We are moving. We are not only in the colonial era, we have moved, and we have done things that establishes us right on the very frontiers. We are not imitating anybody else. We are creating an authentic democracy that matches the best. And there's a chauvinism in the world which regards countries like ours as banana republics. And then, we sell bananas. So I'm grateful, and I want to say thanks, because we are beginning to put it together even here in this launch and lecture. I also have to say thanks to the campus, joining with the faculty, and then, of course, to Mr. Trevor Thomas, the founder and managing director of Pioneer Manufacturing Distributors. The fact that they do Chloradu and all of those, and blue soap and all of those things, is not to say that I'm suggesting that there is a chemical cleansing that is necessary and needed when it comes to elections. Rather, I have to explain that as far as you have to understand that Mr. Thomas is a Myconian. He was a student of the Myco when I was the principal. So the university that has succeeded Myco in being a center of learning and development of Jamaican talent, Caribbean talent, are combined in this. But more so, Mr. Thomas attended the launch last year, Vice Chancellor, was very impressed with all that was said, and decided that he will be on board. And so without any asking, he has joined in saying we need to make sure the content of these books are spread. But more so, what I appreciate more than anything else, that after a short stint in teaching and then years in business, Mr. Thomas has established a company that is at the cutting edge of what private enterprise in Jamaica should be in terms of the development of local talent, in terms of being able to compete with the best in the world, and to do it all here, and to give back to the community. So I'm very happy, Mr. Thomas, for your sponsorship. So when you eat, now, I also have to thank Ian Randall Publishers. Ian Randall Publishers has the most impressive publications of works done in the Commonwealth Caribbean, with over 400 titles. That's a lot. And when I presented, I won't make a point that Mr. Randall was also once a student, not at the Myco, but at Excelsior. But what you have to respect Ian Randall Publishers for is that they have developed these impressive collections that when you come to look at it, is saying what we have done and how we have produced intellectually. Because you see, at the root of what is happening in the world today is the fact that we are not intellectual. We can only do things with the hands, but not with the head. Now, when I presented, I wrote one book. When I presented it to Ian Randall Publishers, they said it was about close to 1,100 pages. They said nobody is going to read anything of that. Now, I find it ironic. So much emphasis is being placed on reading and literacy, and when you write something, people can't read past 20 pages. What kind of thing is that? That don't make sense. But it's true. So I had to write a conclusion to the colonial years and an introduction to the independence years so that both could stand on their own. And so it's really 1,200 pages now. So I leave you to work out that. I have not written for the tweet and the soundbite and the video clip and the meme. You can do that to attract attention. But in terms of getting down to substance, people to read and understand, you better take on the text. And I find that young people are reading some long tomes. Some of those things, I've seen my daughter read 800 pages, you know, and of that nature. I want also, I see some of my Calabar brethren here, and I recognize them because, you see, when you begin to talk about Igbo, they come from Calabar land. And I'll tell you this, I discovered that I am a red Igbo. No joke. My parents moved to an area in Cashew Park Road when somewhere around 9, 10, and I love cricket, and I would, you know, to join cricket, you have to first field. And then you get a bat, you get a ball, and you get a bat. And two older boys, my same age, were controlling the game. So I started to field, of course. I don't know them, they don't know me, but I love cricket, they love cricket. We're there. And after a while, when it came around to bowl, one boy said, "Give Red Igbo the ball." And I got the ball, and I bowled. And then when it came turn to bat, they said, "Give Red Igbo the bat." And I batted. I've always therefore regarded Red Igbo as friendship and fairness. But then I discovered later on, it has a pejorative meaning. When you're a Red Igbo, you have you have features of white and black and no country, except Jamaica, because you don't come from anywhere. So I've read where some people describe what they call the Red Igbo syndrome, which even turns it into a pathological condition. But then I had a friend who was my class. We were in class at Calabar and we were friends from Malines Road and so on. And he went as a missionary in Nigeria and found out that there was a clan among the Igbos that are Red Igbos. Their skin turn. So, I want to thank the Vice Chancellor, Mr. Dr. Moyston and Dr. Peters, for what they have said. When they were talking about some of those things, I have to tell you, I have not known of some of those sources. You see, they are coming from the perspective of persons trained in those disciplines. I've just trespassed because I'm trying to solve issues and problems. Because if you get, I joined the university Vice Chancellor at age 26. They did not hold on to throw me out, because I was introduced by the head of the department to the students. But I was younger than most. And the problem that one was always confronted with, if you're teaching students, don't you have to really know them as persons and understand their mindset and their mentality? I first started to teach at Excelsior. And Mr. Powell saw in me what I didn't know I had. And so he made me very early, after about 3 years, he made me head of the science department. And I sat down with and it was a big department, 6-stream school, big science department. And we said, how should we teach science? And we decided to allow the other teachers to teach. We, the more experienced member of staff, and I was only that age, would teach the law school, forms 1 to 3, and sixth form, and everybody else, the 4th, 5th, and 6th. And they would teach the brighter students, and we would teach the ones who are said to need to be struggling. But how did we start? To deal with the matter of curiosity. Everybody is into critical thinking and creative expression. But the beginning of all of this is curiosity. And so what we started to do was to teach them, here is the topic. What is the question? What is the question? And that has stayed with me throughout life. We cannot be content with just taking things as we see them. We have to look and argue something. So there are two people who are not here this evening that I want to particularly thank as well. One is the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, and the other is the Honorable Bruce Golding. Both of them are traveling, and I've given their excuse for coming. But here's, former Prime Minister Patterson wrote the prelude that connects both books. One of the strange things about prime ministers is that they read. Be careful what you write. They read. And they have long memories. And Honorable Bruce Golding wrote the foreword to the independence years. I noticed Vice Chancellor did not plead guilty to writing the foreword to the colonial years. But when I started to write this project in 2016, I went to 4 people to interview them. I still have the little book in which I recorded their interviews. I went and spoke with the Honorable P.J. Patterson, the Honorable Edward Seaga, the Honorable Bruce Golding, and Dr. Paul Robertson. Why? Because during the tenure at the Electoral Commission, I learned of between 1976 and 1979, in the most violent period of Jamaican history, when the whole society rose up and said, no, what is happening is absolutely unacceptable. The leadership of the country, of both political parties, heard. And 8 of them met secretly to design a way to move away from the colonial past and the structures of which the Vice Chancellor spoke so eloquently, embedded in deep animosity and exploitation, winner take all. Whoever wins the government takes everything and does everything to control. They said, no, we're going to move away from that. And they designed the EAC and put it into law in 1979. It didn't stop the violence, because the 1980 elections are the most violent in our history. But 37 years later, in 2016, we had the most peaceful election in the history of the country, with the Honorable Dorothy Pine McClarty as chairman. The government changed by 1 seat. Nobody questioned that they had lost unfairly. Every losing candidate, that's a miracle. If you understand elections, that's a miracle. For every losing candidate to accept that they lost fairly is a miracle. More than that. And this is where you really test something. There were mistakes made by the electoral officials. But everybody accepted the mistakes as honest mistakes. Human error. And the country held together on that 1 seat. The government didn't try to undermine the opposition, and the opposition didn't try to obstruct the government. and the country held together. That, to me, said this thing had to be written. But I didn't write it from the position of a historian or a social scientist. I wrote it seeking to answer questions. Okay, so this happened, and these people acted in such a noble and patriotic fashion as statesmen. No, there was a ninth. The ninth person was the Prime Minister, Michael Manley. And let me tell you something. We don't understand the power of Prime Ministers. Because if he didn't agree, none of what the others came to could happen, because he has to give up the power. To remove the electoral system from the control of the party in power and to have a number of conventions and norms and oaths that people will voluntarily accept, where the superior body, the parliament, will take the word of the lesser body, namely the Electoral Commission, and pass it into law if all the members are unanimous. So, okay, great event. I'm a little bit of a contrarian. So my question was, how did we come to this? What happened before? And so I began to go back. Then I realized you have to go back to the beginning. Now, while I was there and doing the things, I read and I jot down things. So I knew enough when I was in the commission. I remember once teasing people that people talk about Jamaica being violent. It was Barbados that brought violence to Jamaica. Because when Modiford arrived, there had been an election in 1663, which was joyful and rejoicing, and he brought 400 planters from Barbados, who said, away with what the election that has just been had. We are now here, we want fresh elections. And there was a fight. And in fact, there was a duel. That's how people kill people in the past legally. There was a duel, and one guy from the Legislative Council killed the guy from the Assembly, all on the basis of privilege. And Reverend Gardner, writing the history of Jamaica, published in 1873, recorded that that was the beginning of violence in Jamaica, in elections. I knew enough to tease the Barbadians at that point, but I didn't know enough as I went back and researched the whole thing coming up. Remember, I'm looking at it from the point of view of not all the scholarship, but what is happening here. And I have to just make another point. I have gone through the Jamaican society like this historically 5 times. This is the 5th. This sounds crazy, but my master's was on body image, physical beauty, the handsome girl, the beautiful girl, the handsome boy, and what you like and don't like about yourself. And then that's my master's. I got a distinction for it. So it must have been good. Coming from London University. But I went back through the society to find that when the 2 continents, people from the 2 continents met on Jamaican soil, the Africans thought themselves beautiful and the Europeans ugly. And the reverse. In fact, Brian Edwards, writing about 1828, said he could not understand how the Africans could regard the aquiline features of the European and ugly, and their own physical features as beautiful. What started integration? It's after slavery when we begin to integrate. There is a thing about integration that it changes everybody. Because what I found to be the concept of beauty was not African or European or Chinese. Everybody had a common browning kind of beautiful concept with, of course, with an African body, especially if the gluteal muscles were prominent. And I found that even little boys in school would get upset emotionally if their teacher was so endowed. So that's number one. The second time I went through the Jamaican Society again, 300 years and odd, was in understanding the matter of race and class and color. You see, Jamaica was one of the few places that legally, when the Browns challenged for power, the issue became that the law was passed only in Jamaica where you could legally become white after 5 back crosses, as the biologists would say, to a white parent. We are the only place that did that. American definition was that you have to have 1/64th part Negro blood. That's genetic, and I don't know how you trace that. But in our case, it was the phenotype that mattered, how you looked, and not your genealogy that counted. I went through again and looked at that. And then I looked at it for the educational system. Everybody wants to start education from emancipation or 1835, 1836. So I went back again because, you see, most of the schools, a lot of the schools across the Caribbean that we now elevate started in slavery before. And in fact, I want to tell you, the first black graduate of Cambridge University graduating in 1721 was a boy from Spanish Town named Francis Williams, who, when the Duke of Montagu, who was also the professor of physics at Cambridge, saw the two people from the two continents clashing, wondered, do they have the same intellectual ability? And the only way to prove it was, and like Piaget and all of them, by an experiment of one. So he took a bright boy from a school in Spanish Town and sent him to England to grammar school with the understanding that if he passed grammar school, he would go to university and so on. And Francis Williams did all of that. It's a long time that our elementary schools produce people who can compete with the rest of the world. I don't know why people are saying now that they're so dunce. Because our people are never regressing. Our young people, what they're getting today is a raw deal. Let me come off that. The fourth time was on gender. The man-woman thing. And let me tell you, there was a lot of vicious violence and exploitation. But let me tell you something. The African woman was never only a victim. She fought back with everything at her disposal, and she negotiated for her children. She negotiated for her children. Especially, you see, there's something about sickness, and you're facing death, and somebody helps you through that. That makes a big difference. And bring people into. So the things that we have shown a common humanity about are not in the same spirit. You have, as I have written, the Jamaican society may be divided in work and all kinds of things by day, but it's integrated in bed at night. And you have people of all kinds of, let's leave it. And then the rumbar, called differently in different generations. That is okay. So I'm being cut off. So, all right. Let me just make one final point. And I want to address it to Sir Hilary Beckles. Sir Hilary, we share the birthdays and with Sharon and so on. We go back a long way. But I want to tell you, and you should know, that you are the premier historian of the Caribbean and rank with the best in the world. As a graduate of this university in the early 1960s, I can remember where pundits and all kind of people called us semi-literates, called the university here at Mona the ghetto. You have not only risen to being one of the premier historians of the world, especially here, but you have taken the UWI with you. To be one of the top universities in the world. And you have done it at a time when white racism is again rising to an obnoxious level in the world, with a sophistication in the language, but a repetition of the past. And what you have done is to show them that people of African ancestry are not only good through the physical attributes of the body, but of the mind and of the intellect. Nobody who defies the status quo will not attract controversy and will not get into trouble. Good trouble. Will not have scars. But thank you. I want to close with one thing. One of the things about the academic community is that it seldom recognizes the matter of faith. And what I've done since I'm freed of the shackles of having to write publications for the academy, where you cannot deal with the matter of faith, is to address it here. And I've traced it through the various denominations and the people and what the church has done in Jamaica, through as denominations, but as individuals called upon in times of crisis. My great concern at the moment is that we are seeing our progress as a destination and not realizing that it is continuous application to certain principles. That we have to have the courage to stand up against evil, but at the same time have goodwill and love, even to those who oppose us and who we resist. And that in the end, there is a good Lord that is working out his purpose, irrespective. But in the end, it is the choice that we make. I thank you for all of this, and I wish for my country and our people, because we are not only a place, but a people, that we will find it within ourselves to cope with our present situation. Because some of the means by which we resisted slavery is inimical to us as a sovereign people, in addition to the legacy that we inherited, where you hold down and you take away, where you take, where you trick, where you declare Babylon. We must come together as one people. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Miller. We now invite Mr. Alfred Thomas, Managing Director of tonight's, sponsor of tonight's reception, to make a special presentation to Professor Miller. Professor Miller, please stay on the stage with us. We ask you to move center stage. And Mr. Thomas will be making a special presentation to Professor Miller and also to Dean Cowenberg. And our keynote speaker will also be receiving a special presentation. Please join us on stage. Mr. Miller, you'll go that way. And then Mr. Thomas will be making a special presentation. And then for the keynote speaker, Sir Hilary, Mr. Alfred Thomas of PMD Pioneer Manufacturing Distribution Company Limited will also be making a special presentation. Professor. Thank you. Professor Miller, we appreciate your dedicated scholarly activity and research over the years, which has resulted in the 2-volume work, Elections and Governance, Jamaica on the Global Frontier. And we're happy that you decided to sketch the story of the electoral system of Jamaica and its relationship to governance as it unfolded over 3.5 centuries. Today's event involves not only the formal introduction of a publication on elections and governance resulting from many years of research done in the past, but also includes an initiative to sustain future research on elections and governance. Ladies and gentlemen, to tell us more about this initiative, please help me welcome Mr. Christopher Kelman, Managing Partner of Myers, Fletcher & Gordon, one of the largest and most respected law firms in Jamaica and the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean. Now, scholarships at the University of the West Indies are administered through the Office of the Campus Registrar, through particularly the Office of Student Financing, and so we will ask Mr. Jonathan Archie to join us on stage for a special presentation at the end of Mr. Kelman's remarks. Thank you.
Yes, well rooted. Vice Chancellor Beckles, Campus Principal, Professor Denzel Williams, other distinguished members of the university community, ladies and gentlemen all. I would like firstly to congratulate Professor the Honorable Errol Miller on the publication of his latest and most seminal work on the history of elections and governance in Jamaica, entitled Elections and Governance, Jamaica on the Global Frontier, the Colonial Years 1663 to 1962, and wish for it, Professor, every success. I am delighted that the occasion of this book launch provided us with an opportunity to announce that Myers, Fletcher & Gordon has decided to award a scholarship, more particularly named the Dorothy Pine McClarty Scholarship in honor of the Honorable Dorothy Pine McClarty, Order of Jamaica, who recently retired from the firm after 60 years of sterling service to our firm, in particular, and the legal profession in general. This scholarship will be awarded from here on biennially to a deserving candidate to pursue postgraduate studies in elections and governance. Like Professor Miller, our illustrious former partner has given yeoman service to electoral reform in Jamaica. For more than 2 decades, beginning in 2000, she served firstly the Electoral Advisory Committee, the EAC, as a selected member, and then the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, the ECJ, when it replaced the EAC in 2006. In 2013, she was appointed the chairman of the ECJ and served in that capacity until her retirement from that body at the end of 2019. The ECJ website records that during her tenure, Dr. Pine McClarty was instrumental in the successful oversight of 4 parliamentary elections, 4 local government elections, and numerous by-elections, a residence verification project, the implementation of the electronic voter identification system, in selected polling stations, among other initiatives to improve Jamaica's electoral system. Additionally, under her leadership, the Commission tabled the long-awaited political parties registration and election campaign financing recommendations. One of our undoubted post-independence successes has been electoral reform, which has transformed our electoral system that was rampant with corrupt practices to one that has become internationally known for achieving free and fair elections. The Honorable Dorothy Pine McClarty was crucial to this process. But to us at MF&G, Mrs. Pine McClarty's record of distinguished public service has significance beyond her safeguarding the democratic foundations of our country. She has nobly advanced one of the long-standing traditions that our founding partners held dear, which is public service. Starting with one of our founding partners, the Honorable Douglas Valmore Fletcher, Order of Jamaica and Privy Councillor, who was himself a member of the Senate, Cabinet Minister, and Ambassador to the United States of America, among his many other seminal roles. Many of our former partners, and indeed current ones, continue this fine tradition of public service. I am particularly delighted, therefore, that in the audience today are several of the younger members of the law firm who today bear witness, and in the years to come, I am certain, will be inspired to make their own contributions to nation building. Mrs. Pine McClarty, in achieving your record of successes and accomplishments, you have not only brought distinction to yourself and to your family, but also to your firm, which I know you cherish. We are immensely proud of you, and in establishing this scholarship named in your high honor, we say thanks. Long may it continue to bring esteem to your name and Mickey to your memory. Thank you.
And now for the special presentation, Mr. Kelman will be presenting the check to Mr. Jonathan Archie, Deputy Campus Registrar. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause, please. Thank you, Mr. Kelman, and I invite the members, yes? I invite the members of the representatives from Myers, Fletcher, and Gordon to stand. You were acknowledged a while ago, the young members. Let's see you. Give a round of applause. Yes. Thank you. We appreciate your firm's initiative in supporting future research in elections and governance in Jamaica, and doing so by recognizing the work of Dr. the Honorable Dorothy Pine McClarty on the Electoral Commission. Thank you. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the close of the formal book launch program. Our vote of thanks will be done by the Director of the School of Education, Dr. Marcia Rainford. And after the vote of thanks, we invite you to join us for the book signing and reception sponsored by Ian Randall Publishers and Pioneer Manufacturing Distribution Company Limited. It was my pleasure being your moderator. You have been a wonderful audience. And now, Dr. Marcia Rainford for the vote of thanks.
All protocols observed. I greet you, most distinguished audience. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My task is made very easy because all the heavy lifting has already gone before. And the fact that this function has not just been informative, but certainly intellectually stimulating, engaging, and executed with expert precision. We want to acknowledge, therefore, those persons who were very instrumental in organizing this function. Firstly, you have heard that the function was a collaboration between the Office of the Campus Principal and the Faculty of Humanities and Education. So we want to thank the Office of the Campus Principal, and in particular, Ms. Stephanie Kane and her team, for their role in putting this function together. Ms. Cadian Martin and her team from Markham for the marketing support provided, and also for the support of the UWITV team led by Janet Carew and for the streaming. For the Faculty of Humanities and Education, the Faculty Office, and in particular, Ms. Sophia Hales Johnson and Ms. Judith Simpson Ricketts and the office team. Thank you very much for putting this function together this evening and ensuring that we've had a really, really well-organized event. We've had a distinguished array of speakers. They have come from different organizations, they have come with different perspectives, and together their contributions produced this rich and fulfilling event. That, of course, was led by our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who gave the keynote address. Distinguished colleagues, Dr. Dexnell Peters and Dr. Louis Moyston, who provided comments on the book from the historical and political science perspectives, respectively. Thank you so much for your contribution. Acting Deputy Principal, Professor Marvin Reed, who brought greetings on behalf of our campus principal. Thank you, sir. Professor Silva Coinberg, Dean of our faculty, for her warm welcome and insightful remarks. Another significant highlight of this evening's event is the launch of this new graduate scholarship that we have just heard about. And so we want to thank the company, Myers, Fletcher, and Gordon, for putting this scholarship in place for graduate students to research these very important areas, and it seems very timely in our history that this is happening. We want to thank the company for their foresight. Very soon, we know you've been here for some time, but when you step outside, you're going to be treated to some delectable finger foods and wines. That has been provided by Pioneer Manufacturing Distribution Company. So you're going to find it's not just the household and industrial chemicals, but they have sponsored the meal that we'll have after this. We want to thank that company for their support. Ian Randall Publishers, who they're responsible, of course, for the book display, and if you have not yet got your book, you should be able, I think, to get afterwards, and I'm not sure if there's going to be a signing, but Professor will sign, so please don't run away. Thank you, Ian Randall, for organizing this, and please ensure you get your copy of the book. Thanks to our moderator, Dr. Livingston White, for steering this function with such clinical efficiency. Thank you, Livingston. I want to thank as well the many distinguished family members, guests, friends, colleagues of Prof. Miller, the wider UWI community, for your presence and participation in this function. You have braved the weather to be here this evening, and I know that it was not an easy thing, because as Caribbean people, we're afraid of dog and we're afraid of rain. So the fact that you're here is a good show. Last but by no means least, I want to thank Professor the Honorable Errol Miller for this work. Prof. Miller, it's more than your work that you shared this evening. You shared your heart, and I'm so proud that I have come to know you, and that I know that you're a genuine Jamaican with a great care, not just for your country, but people generally. I want to thank you for the fact that you have not retired into the sunset, but you have continued your work and you have left a rich legacy for us, not just in the School of Education, but in other disciplines because of how you see yourself and your role. I pray God's continued blessing on you and ask that you will not give up, you will not stop. Thank you so very much. And so I have been told to tell you, as you step outside to get something to eat, please keep safe and keep dry as you leave. The Lord bless you all.